Hi there, I'm Courtney Brown, and this is my Project 1 for Engineering 340. The project description is that we have a project manager for the Automobile Alliance Company who must decide what their production schedule for the next month is going to look like. She has to decide how many family thrill seekers and classy cruisers to make. She wants to maximize the profits while considering the certain constraints regarding labor hours, resource requirements and limits, and maximum capacity. First part of the problem is to help the manager formulate and solve a linear program to determine the number of cars that will optimize profits. And the second part of the problem is to do the same thing in the first half, but with increments of 2% and to see what we would get from there. So this table here shows a little bit more of the details of this problem. We have a total of 48,000 labor hours in the month, and we have to spend 10.5 of those hours on each classy cruiser and 6 on the family seeker. We only have 20,000 doors to work with, which we're going to increase by 2% increments for part 2 of the problem. And we have a 2-door classy cruiser and a 4-door family thrill seeker. And then for capacity, we can only make 3,500 classy cruisers, but we don't have any limits on the family thrill seeker. Here is the mathematical model of the problem. We have our decision variables, TS for the thrill seeker and CC for the classy cruiser. We have our objective function right here, and we want to maximize profits by charging $3,600 for the thrill seeker and $5,400 for the classy cruiser. And then we have our constraints here that we went over in the table. So it talks about the labor hours, the doors, the capacity, and then obviously we don't want to be in the negatives anywhere. So for part 1, we first have our simple model here, which is basically a very simple solver issue. So we're just going to hit optimize, and we get our objective function maximized with having 3,800 family thrill seekers and 2,400 classy cruisers. So we can look at the code behind the scenes and see that we just did a simple solver method for this problem. So now we'll move into the other scenarios. So here we have our table set up of what we want to solve for with the increments listed from 0 to 10, going by 2. And then we have our constraints here. As you see, the door constraints are left out for each increment, and that's where we're going to pull from access from our other database table. So first I will walk you through the code, and then we can see it work. So first you're going to want to create a connection with the database and create a record set. So I did that right here, having CN as the connection and RS as the record set. And then we have that connection opening with CN. We have our connection string showing the path to our database and access, and we're opening it. And we want to open it in order to get the increments. So right here I'm declaring our variables. I'm setting my worksheet and my cell and the ranges for where I want the data to go into. I am using an SQL statement here and then looping through, pulling from access, putting it into my Excel table in each one of these yellow boxes here, which is why we are counting by 3 here. And then after that we want to make sure we close the table. So then moving into kind of what we did in the first part of the problem, we're going to use solver. And so just recorded a macro of me doing solver for each one of the increments, which is what this code is right here. And so it's going to go through and pull from each one of those door capacities and use the other constraints to solve for that. So next, what we want to do is be able to take those values in this table that we'll get, and we want to put them back into access. So first I declared my variables as my ranges. I want to name the ranges of my thrill seekers, my cruisers, and my profits in order to put those back. So I had my column, my C3 through C8 for thrill seekers. I titled that CS or TS, and then D right here I had it be my cruisers and then profit. And so then now that everything is named, we're going to use those values or those names to pull back into the Access database. So we want to open up the database again, and here I'm declaring a variable called offset, which is basically going to kind of act as our step value to move the column over each time we go through it. And so I initialize the variable as 0, and then every time it goes through, it's going to start at 0, and then it's going to move over 1. And so when it moves over 1, it's going to put that column in for the thrill seekers, and then the classic cruisers, and then the profits, and so on until we're done updating the table, and then we're going to close, and that's my code. So now we can watch it work. So I'll go back to my Excel table and click Optimize. So as you can see here, the table is filled with all the solved values. We have 3,800 thrill seekers and 2,400 cruisers for 640 million, and so on throughout the table, going up for 2%, 4%, 6, 8, and 10. So now what we want to do is go open Access to see if it updated our Access table. So now that we're in Access, we can see that it updated the table to the amount of thrill seekers and the amount of classic cruisers that we need for each profit. So just to recap, we used Excel to do a simple solver model, and we got our value for part A of this problem. And then for part B, we had a bigger solver problem with each increment from 0 to 10 going by 2 to get our maximize objective function. And here are our results both in our Excel table and in our Access database. So lastly, the lessons that I've learned through this, a few big picture lessons, just to write out a plan first before coding and then going to coding. It makes it a little bit easier and keeps you more organized. And then another lesson is to plan to spend the majority of the time researching. That you'll need a lot more time than you think you need on this. And then as far as VBA coding skills goes, just I learned how to connect a database to Excel. I learned to pull from that database into Solver, and then also learned how to update that Access table. And overall, I think I just improved. Safe to say that I improved my skills with using VBA.